Good evening. Thank you for joining us. I'm sorry to keep using your time, but I think it's important that we do actually get a chance to meet face to face and then give you a chance to ask some questions. Thank you also for the many comments over the course of this week. They've been very useful. I'm just going to tonight run through a few things just to stimulate some questions. I'm going to cover firstly the decision making that goes into whether the school opens or closes. Secondly, what we can do to control that and how we can get ourselves open again. Thirdly, I want to talk a little bit about the provision of remote learning and how we can improve that over the next sort of week, 10 days. We'll talk a little bit about mock examinations and what the exam boards are doing for the summer for GCSEs and A-level, and then a little bit about staffing, both internally now, but also how we staff for next year. So that's where we're at. Just want to, what I'll do is, having said some words, we will then set up a panel discussion. If you'd like to make any or ask any questions, can you add those to the comment section on the right-hand side of your screen? And I have tonight, I've got Tim McConnell-Wood, who is the Vice Principal Pastoral, and I've got Adam Gibson, who's the Head of Prep School, and in the background, Damien Ward, is there who may well answer some of the questions in the background directly onto the comment feed. So that's the form tonight. So just firstly, a little bit about what happened 10 days ago. Had a number of parents saying, you know, Mr. Wilson must have known 10 days ago. The reality is there are about between 400 and 500,000 pupils being educated in Abu Dhabi, probably another 40,000 teachers. And over the course of the week before, about half of those pupils would have been tested. And also there would have been, obviously every single member of staff was tested on top of all the support staff. So a frightening amount of testing. And that testing finished on the Friday. I gather a decision was made during the night, in the early hours of the morning. It was ratified at 10 o'clock and we got the information out to you as soon as we'd actually had a chance to react. So it is being very, very carefully thought out in relation to obviously numbers of people who have the virus, and it's been done for the sake of the communities and to try and bring this thing under control. So no, we're not involved in discussions weeks before. This is really scientific information is driving this, and decisions are made for the right reasons. And I think looking at the numbers in the city at the moment, I think that's very wise advice. So just moving on, just a little bit about what we can do. If you look at viruses, if you look at infections, there's isolation, there's vaccination, there's cure, and there's the hope that the virus will go away. I think the last of those is extremely unlikely in the short term. Just to reassure you, over the Christmas holidays, 10 out of the 160 academic members of staff travelled, and those that did were back on the 19th of December. So the staff really are taking this process very seriously. As of last Tuesday, 77% of the entire staffing on the campus have been vaccinated. Of that, we're looking that will go up to about 82, 83%. There are those that can't be vaccinated because they've either had the virus or they have medical conditions. But we're talking about only 4% at the moment saying that they wouldn't take a vaccine. So I think that's pretty good news in terms of getting people back. What can we do as a community? Obviously, the vaccination process is a very personal thing to individuals, but that's certainly a lever that is one that we can pull. The second one is actually being sensible about where we go to, without mentioning different parts. But there are definitely places in the UAE that are have a very high population of viruses at the moment. I think we've got to be sensible about, if we don't have to travel to those places, we shouldn't do, because every single one of our cases that we've had at school has originated from the same place. And obviously the advice I'm giving my staff is to try and minimize the travel to there. So The final bit is really to keep us informed. If you do unfortunately catch virus or you've been in contact, please let us know, because it's important that we track and trace. Now, we're due back on the 7th. I think I made a pretty big mistake in the holidays. My brain was so geared towards coming back to school. I allowed myself to plan pretty entirely for that. The reality of it is, when people travel and they travel to places where there's a high concentration of virus, it was always going to give us a spike. First week of term, first 2 weeks of term, I think we were probably not on our money with the remote learning. And I think it was really important that we stepped up our game. So what's happening about that? Firstly, staff that were being redeployed to do break duties, lunch duties. When you add up the number of duties required, it's a terrifying number of hours. So we've redeployed those staff back into the classroom, which I think will help supporting. We've been lucky with our recruiting, been able to recruit 1 or 2 new teachers to support us. But importantly, what we're doing is we're getting SLT, senior leadership team, into classrooms and actually looking at what we're doing in the lessons to improve that. Now, there's something that's really important for now and also when we go back full time, which is to really understand how the support structure works. I've said a lot of times that if you've got an issue, and as a parent, I talk a lot about gut feelings. Something is not right. What do you do with that gut feeling? First port of call, tutor or the class teacher if your child is looked after by a class teacher. But don't leave it there. If something's not done and we don't react quickly enough, it's very, very important that that's escalated to the heads of year group in the pre-prep, heads of year group in the prep school, and the housemasters and mistresses in the senior school. The reason for that, as you go up the scale, you get more and more experience, and you get closer and closer to, obviously, the management decision-making process. So it's really important that we follow that process. Simply bypassing the system, coming to me, or coming to Adam, or coming to one of the heads of school, simply then changes that structure. And I would really urge that we continue to do that. Now, I've asked the heads of school, each heads of year in the pre-prep, the heads of school in the, heads of year in the prep school, and the housemasters and mistresses to run every week on Thursday a session where you as parents can drop into and just throw anything that you think is, things that could help us with this process. So that'll start off and be finalized this week, and we will obviously circulate you the details, but that's really, really important. The second support service is Wellbeing. There's a number of children who haven't been into school for the best part of a year now, and they are really starting to struggle. So the link, obviously, through the Deputy Head of Wellbeing, Natasha Williams. She's done sterling work with training up mental first aiders, and I'm really pleased to see that we're now up over the 50 mark in terms of parents who've taken that course. We're looking to roll out a course for year 7 and 8 about mental first aid training, and we're also looking to send out a series of podcasts, and obviously there's the CCC coffee mornings. I think it's really important that we start to use these support services. And if you're a new parent, it's really important that you link in with your Cranley community buddy. If there is anything that you want to know, we're in very close contact with them. And I think that's a really good starting point. It's easy to be sort of doom and gloom. One of the things that really lifted us this week, obviously the university places are coming in for year 13, and they really are getting into some quite spectacular universities. And doing us proud. Their EPQ results, again, were very encouraging. To be sort of 30-odd% above the UK national average, and to put on, dramatic increases from last year is telling us that there is some good stuff happening in remote learning. Reading records in the prep school actually are looking good as well. So I think there is an awful lot of good education happening, but it's not to say it can't get better. I want to move on a little bit to talk about GCSE and A-level exams. There's been a lot of information in the press. The GCSE and A-level exams are going through a process of consultation. The exam body in the UK, Ofcol, are having a consultation that ends at the end of this month. Exam year groups, pupils and parents have been given the opportunity to have their say. But what it's looking like is that we will be predicting grades to submit to the exam boards. Now, to do that, we are going ahead with our mock exam process. We discussed it at length with the A-level group, and I'd like to thank them for their maturity and their understanding. Essentially, what we're doing is we're using next week from Sunday as an online exam. So they're going to use an online platform, and then the second week they should be back in school, in which case they will do their exams face-to-face. You could argue, why don't we just delay it till they come back? If we delay it till they come back, we end up with a situation that the time we have to look at the exams, make adjustments, talk about their technique, teach them things that they don't know, all of that time starts to diminish quite dramatically, particularly with half-term timing and particularly with the Easter holidays. So we're going ahead with that because they will do a second set of papers in May, in early May, either because the exam boards ask us directly or we need those results as well. Those exams could be online, they could be face-to-face, so we're covering all our bases. So we didn't think it was a good time to stall on that. For those of you in Year 9, there are a few Year 9 early entries. We will be in touch with details of that, what we want them to do. Now, at this stage of the year, people tend to talk an awful lot to me about what's happening next year with staffing. And I think it's important to be transparent. What we do every year is I go into the marketplace early. So we advertise generically at the beginning of November for new staff. And what we do is we then ask our staff to declare their hand in terms of their intentions in December. What they then do is they can come back to us with, yes, I'm staying, yes, I'm going. And there are people who say, look, I'm not sure. And we obviously keep closely in contact. I'm pleased to say that the field this year was extraordinary in November. We have made all the appointments that we need to make for the people who are leaving. And we have various people in reserve to cover the bases for people who might leave over the next sort of couple of weeks. I'm not going to declare my hand in terms of who's coming or who's going, because for all intensive purposes, the end of March is the time where, from a contractual point of view, people have to hand their notice in. All I would say is that the pandemic has caused one or two things. One is it's caused people to say, look, I've got a job, I'm staying, and other people who are obviously very affected about being quite a long way from home. And it's worked both ways. There are people who are trying to get out of the UK, there are people who are trying to get back into the UK. But I just wanted to reassure you that this is something that we start very early, and we've had a fairly useful couple of years sort of trying that and testing. My final thing, because I think it's important that we go on to talk and take questions. My final thing really is to give a plug. Those of you that know me know I'm very competitive, and the thought that the UK prep school gets out to us on there. We've got a competition which is called the Race to Cranley. We are logging miles and bicycles and walking and swimming. And we're seeing whether we can get back to the UK before they can get out here. So I'm just giving that a plug. Not that I think anybody wants to go back to the UK at the moment, because it's freezing, snowy, horrible. And they'd be much better to come out here. But let's get that going, because it has an added whammy of getting your kids moving and exercising, which I think is really important. So I'm going to bring onto the screen now both Tim McConnell-Wood and Adam Gibson. Tim is going to pose the questions and we'll answer the questions that we have in the script and take it from there. So over to you, Tim.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thanks very much for joining us tonight. I'm just going to ask Mr. Wilson to turn his microphone off. Thank you. Good evening again, and I hope you found what Mr. Wilson just said useful. What I'd like you to do, please, if you've got any questions that you'd like to ask us, please put them in the chat. We have a document working in the background where we get fed the information, what the questions are, and through either myself, Mr. Wilson, or Mr. Gibson, we will endeavour to answer for you. So please do ask as many questions as you want. We'll probably go at this for about 20 to 30 minutes and then call it a day. But please do ask any questions you want. If we can start off with just what happens if the students don't come back on the 7th of February. Currently, we're in a situation where we're looking a couple of weeks ahead. We're really hoping the children are coming back. I've got staff doing all sorts of things over this week. But what happens if we get instructions from the government or ADEC in a week's time saying the children are not coming back? Maybe Mr. Wilson, could you pick this one up, please?
I think that really refers to what I was talking about in the chat beforehand. We have to make sure our online learning is as good as possible. Are the children coming back on the 7th? I think it'll depend on testing regime, how many of the children have or are carrying the virus, how many of the teachers. Again, just to reassure you, total of the people who we test each time we have PCR testing, I think is about 279. One person out of 279 when we were tested on the 14th was positive. And that person, they strongly believe is because they had a second vaccine and there was a sort of sloughing of the virus, and they've been asymptomatic, but obviously quarantining. Now, in terms of what happens if we don't come back, we simply carry on with the remote learning as we are, but we're looking to try and make it as good as we possibly can. I think realistically, we've got to get our heads around both eventualities. I think the issue we had at the beginning of term is we'd all got ourselves into a mindset that we were coming back. We got ourselves into a mindset that we were coming back on 2 weeks later, and it didn't happen. And that is becoming very, very difficult mentally. So I think the protectionism says plan for both eventualities and work from it there. Okay.
Thank you. Yeah, I've just seen a question's just dropped in about sort of linked to this. Will the school have a choice to bring back a certain cohort if the authorities determine everyone cannot come back in at the same time? I'll just answer that one straight away. It's a good question. The fact is, and it alludes to what Mr. Wilson said earlier, we have no control over that. Ultimately, the ADEC authorities or the government will tell us exactly who and who can't come back. And that's been the problem with the year 7s to 9s for the last 3 months. We've been desperate to have them back. We've been ready to have them back. But the government have told us absolutely clearly those year groups cannot come back. So we don't have control over that discussion. Fundamentally, that will come from the authorities, and we will only know that whenever they choose to tell us or when they're ever in a position to tell us. And I think, sort of going, again, alluding to what Mike said earlier, the fact is the authorities have done an incredible job over the last nearly year now in terms of managing this crisis here in this country. And certainly I know from my own personal point of view, I feel a lot safer being here in the UAE than I would if I was at home. So I think from that point of view, I feel utterly secure in relying on the authorities to make those decisions for us. Obviously, from an educational point of view and from a school point of view, we would want all the students back now, and we're ready to get them back. So I suppose that's the short answer to the question. But fundamentally, the authorities will tell us when that is going to happen. Just picking up on one or two other questions. Question about CCAs and games. I think one of the biggest issues for all of us at the moment, and that's you as parents and the students, is the lack of exercise and the lack of sport and the lack of activity that everybody's doing. And I think we're all in that same problem. Question about when will CCAs restart? Is there any intention to get PE going? And when the students come back to school, what's going to happen about CCAs and PE? Mike, could I throw that one back again to you, if that's possible, please?
Yes, again, the decision that's made on that. What I think will happen, we are being encouraged to take the children outside. We're still at a time of year where they can be outside. There is a lot of activities going on outside Abu Dhabi. and I think they will gradually sort of loosen them up. What I think, one of the things we've been talking to ADEC in the background about is, can we, stop the school day and can we run clubs? That is possibly one of the ways that we'll move forward, which is to set up clubs that happen after school. They are, carefully controlled, obviously, with bubbles and things like that, but I think it may well start that way. The real difficulty when we come back is that we have redeployed staff into support roles. So, those of you last term would have noticed there was a teacher and a support teacher in classes up to, some quite old classes. The problem with it is we would then need to use some of those staff to do the PE staff back into PE, etc. But it is literally, we are ready to go with that. We have our program ready, we have our booklets ready, and we can operate that as soon as we know.
Thank you. Apologise, I didn't mute, so I hope everybody heard that okay. Got a question about if the children do remain at home, what will the format of remote learning be? Will it remain the same as it is? And will there be any change in the focus of synchronous or asynchronous lessons and finish time at school? Mr. Gibson, can I ask you to respond to that question, please?
Yeah, certainly. Thank you. Good evening, everyone. It's a good question because, as Mr. Wilson said, we were fully set up, both in terms of staffing, every other physical resource, in terms of timetabling, to be back face-to-face. So as we're not back face-to-face, the timetable that we are using is the timetable that we'd had in place for face-to-face learning. For the first 2 weeks, we were thinking, okay, this is just 2 weeks. Now we're thinking it's 3 weeks. It's absolutely right that we are now beginning to think, how do we adjust this? How do we develop it? And I think there are three particular strands that I'd like to talk about. The first is the shape of the day, in other words, the length of the day. I have had some really constructive, helpful feedback from parents in pre-prep and prep about what's working and what isn't working. Good feedback from colleagues as well, particularly in the pre-prep. In the pre-prep, the graveyard slot, that after lunch slot where we're trying to get people back in, it's hard work for the children, and to actually see some of the children actually asleep after they've had a reasonably early start. They've had a good lunch and they've just hit the wall. We need to be adjusting what we're doing to fit in with what the children need. So that's the first point. The second point actually is something that's sort of percolated through more recently, and it's the balance in part between live and asynchronous. At the moment, we are entirely live. Now, more and more, there are conversations that I'm having with parents about how much should we be doing? Should we be doing everything? And the answer to that, quite simply, and I put this into the pre-prep newsletter last Thursday, you as parents will judge what your child needs at that point better than we can. In a classroom as teachers, if we're teaching a lesson to a class of children and they're just not with it for whatever reason, maybe there was a drama production, we wish, the night before. Maybe 3 or 4 of them have gone on fixtures and the dynamic had changed. Then what you'll do as a teacher is you will adjust the rhythm and the pace, and you'll just shift what it is you're trying to achieve. As parents, you are the best people to be able to observe the mood. And I don't mean that in a fickle, shallow sense, but actually the momentum is probably a better way to describe it, because education never works if we try to drag a child through a curriculum. It works best if we're able to engage and inspire, and that means the child needs to be in the right frame of mind to be engaged and inspired. So one of the things that I think we are going to look at is building more flexibility into how we structure, perhaps not so much the shape of the day. I think the core of the day will remain the same, but look at how we structure our lessons. One of the things we're thinking about, particularly in the prep school at the moment, is homework, because we're determined to make sure that our homework is absolutely away from screens, but it still adds value, it adds depth. So I think it's those three things. First of all, thinking about the length of the day, thinking about the balance between live and asynchronous, and also just the license for you as parents actually to be able to say, do you know what? we've just reached that point today where we've achieved what we need to achieve, and actually it'll be far better for my son, my daughter, to go to gymnastics, to go for a bike ride, to go and go for a swim, because you know your children better than we do. We want to make sure absolutely that our curriculum and there isn't, in many ways, as the children get older, the core curriculum changes, of course, but we need to make sure that we are covering what we are covering as well as we can. So that's about us being engaging and inspiring, and also that your children are in the frame of mind to be able to look forward, to engage and to enjoy. So we haven't got a neat set of answers yet. We can't simply say yes, and this is what it will look like. But this is this is driven by a lot of the work that Mr. Ward's been doing in his lesson observations, that we're all doing as members of the leadership team, dropping into lessons, getting a sense of what's working, and actually reviewing how we are delivering what we're delivering online. I hope that helps, Mr. McConnell-Wood.
Thank you. Yeah, I just follow up with that, actually. Another question along the similar lines, and I'll pick this up in the answer. A comment about FS1 teacher doing a fantastic job looking after her class, but maybe online lessons aren't suitable for that age group. And as the weeks go by, the children are struggling emotionally. Do they need more asynchronous work or videos to follow, and so on? And I think that to add to what Mr. Gibson's just said, we're very much reviewing this for each year group. We're looking at each year. I'll come back to you, Mr. Wilson, in a second. Yeah, we're very much looking at each year group, and I've been focusing on the more senior children, and we're looking at a much more individualized, different way of dealing with things, focusing on their well-being rather than how they're progressing rapidly through the curriculum and so on. But certainly what you're saying in terms of the younger children, yeah, we're very much looking at that. Mr. Wilson, if I hand over to you.
Yes, and I think it comes back to the report, the reporting structure I was talking about earlier, which is it's really, really important that we get feedback. Now, obviously, your relationship with your child's class teacher, your relationship with their tutor is going to be the closest. Very happy for the feedback to come through them. Very happy for the feedback to come on the Thursday afternoon sessions, where you dial into the head of year group or the housemaster mistress and feedback that way, and just simply say, look, this is what the week's been like, because we're going to have to be nimble on our feet. There's a sort of a link, if you like, to the large bubble sizes. Now, when you look at the large bubble sizes are not because suddenly we've increased the numbers in the school. The only year group that is above the sort of 120 mark, which is 20 in a class, is year 5. We brought in an extra teacher for year 5 to take those bubble sizes down. With the year 6s and 7s and 8s, what we've got is groups of children, groups that are 14, 15, where we're working specifically with children who need some support. And at the same time, obviously, the quid pro quo is a bigger bubble size, but those children tend to be the children that we're accelerating. Now, where I think the first 2 weeks wasn't brilliant is that we didn't do what we wanted to do, which is we wanted to pull out of those bubbles groups of 5, 6, 7 at a time, so that we could work specifically with them, with a teacher, and then put them back in and move on to the next one. That's what Tim and Adam are alluding to. We need to start to put these interventions in, and this is part of what we've reorganized over the last sort of 10 days, is to get teachers who can come in and intervene, take groups off and work with them. If we feel that's not working, then we might have to go back to a more mixed ability approach that we had last term. So there's lots of sort of dynamics here. The reason we can't do that as easily this term is we've got 300 odd teachers, odd pupils extra back in school. And obviously that stretches our staffing. So some of the resources we were using for the younger year groups have now got to be redeployed back into the year groups that are now in. So it is a dynamic thing, but the most important thing is this consistent feedback, because what works for the next 10 days might not work for the 10 days afterwards. And each 10 days that you're reacting too slowly loses ground that we didn't lose. So we've just got to keep talking to each other and actually get this information back across.
Apologies, sorry, I was just trying to find my mouse on the multiple screens I've got in front of me. Just a follow-up, one question that's come up, it's not really linked to this, but it sort of leads on. It might help if we as parents could get the weekly curriculum, i.e. for maths, fractions, percentages, etc. Understanding from the parents' question that is an additional burden. I'll just pick that up as an answer. Obviously, I think it's a good idea. We have to balance that request with managing overall workloads with staff, and it is a good idea, but equally it could easily detract from other things. We try and provide termly overviews, and there is an awful lot of that kind of information already on the VLE. And again, if you're not sure where to find all that, please contact your class teacher or tutor, and they will direct you to that. But again, it's something we can look at, and I can see coming through the chat, there are lots of really good suggestions, and what I'd like to do is just reassure you all that we're saving all of this. All this information is being saved, and we will consider a lot of the suggestions that you're making, and we'll look to put things in place where we can. Just looking, there's a question about ADEC and our relationship with ADEC. I'm not sure it's really a question, it's a sort of statement, and I thought, can you feed back to ADEC that as a professional courtesy, schools are informed of major decisions rather than broadcasting last-minute messages on social media? Mr. Wilson, perhaps if I can pass that one to you, just sort of really referring to our relationship with ADEC and how regularly we're in contact with them.
The answer to that question, we're in daily contact with them in one form or another, and they're sort of advice service. And in fact, one of the things that I think has been really strengthened over this pandemic is the relationship between schools and ADEC. I think I'll go back to something I said in my introduction. When you're trying to make a decision about whether to open a school and you're relying on data which is coming from PCR tests, which are arriving with the authorities on Friday night, it's very, very difficult to turn that round very, very quickly. What tends to happen is we don't get a lot of warning on it, simply because the decisions are being made. They make the decision, they tell us, and then we react. I think it's the nature of what we're dealing with COVID. We all would like to be able to plan, but the reality of the situation, if there's a spike in numbers the day before, that's the latest information you have to go on. So I'm sort of in that zone where I fully understand when we get information very late. I understand what happens with your childcare, etc. But realistically, when I scrutinize, could they have given this any earlier? Very, very often not. And you then get the other side of it, which is the summer, where they did give us early warning that a group weren't coming back till the end of the month. We ended up, I think, losing 14, 15 pupils who then disappeared off to countries where the education system was open. So there's a load of factors. And I think if you just look around the world and you look at the decision making, it's incredibly difficult to be making decisions that rely on last minute data.
Thank you. I'm going to sort of switch the focus slightly towards academic progress and what is it that we're doing, or a question is, what is the plan for students who are falling back academically? And I suppose there are a whole series of different strands on this, because there are a number of reasons why students are falling, or pupils are falling back academically. And clearly, as I said earlier, one of our primary concerns at the minute is actually their overall well-being. And we're looking at putting strategies in place for each individual, because every individual has responded in a different way to this. We're putting individual strategies in place to try and support each individual. But maybe if I can ask Mr. Gibson to pick up, what's the strategy from within the prep school?
Yeah, and it's a good question. It's one that it's on every teacher's mind all the time. In terms of tracking attainment, there are all of the usual formative and summative, in other words, all the standard tests and observations remain in place. The question we need to do is make sure we get the timing right so that what we're testing is going to give us useful information. So in terms of tracking pupil performance, the meetings with the heads of department who will run the academic side, so that's the academic attainment, they're really, really clear. They've got very clear structures in place. And actually, a lot of the tools that we would use to be tracking both attainment and delivery in the classroom, they're technical tools anyway, technological tools anyway. So oddly enough, while our teaching delivery has changed, our assessment tracking and our use of data hasn't changed as much as it would have done from being in the classroom. So it's a very, very similar approach to what's happening in school. What's interesting is that, of course, because we're not doing the sporting activities, the drama activities, there's a lot more time, as it were, in the classroom than there would normally be, particularly this time of year. We do a lot more sporting things outside.
Thanks. And from the senior point of view, we already have significant interventions in place for particularly the exam year groups, year 11 and 13. And we're consistently checking the data on those students. And as Mr. Gibson's just said, instead of having sporting activities and the like, we have academic interventions for those more senior students. And actually, that's not really different from the normal interventions we'd be putting in place. Mr. Wilson.
Yeah, I think it's important with parent-teacher evenings coming up. One of the things Mr. Ward will be writing to you on Thursday about is the nature of the discussion for the parent-teacher evenings. And what we're trying to do is be a little bit more elaborate in the discussions with you, rather than just saying he's making or she's making good progress. We're going to try and put a little bit more to that in terms of this is what's the written work's looking like. This is what he or she's like in the classroom, and this is what so that it's a little bit more targeted to as Adam said, the summative and the formative information. So there is a letter coming out later in the week just to summarise that and to give a bit of guidance to what we should be talking about at the parent-teacher evening.
Thank you. I'm not sure if you as parents can sort of see your own discussion that's going on, and it's what's very clear and very obvious from my perspective, looking at the questions that are coming in and looking at the comments that are being made. Every single family within our community has a different circumstance, and I can tell you, I can promise you, as a teaching member of staff who has had children, I visited today one of our staff members who has 2 children who are doing remote learning. Those of you who are saying you're both parents are working and it's so difficult, we absolutely totally understand that. And what we're trying to do as much as possible is not have a one-size-fits-all response to everything, except obviously we have to with certain things like curriculum and with the way we teach. But we're trying to be as flexible as possible. And I suppose one of the areas is finding that balance between pushing our children to make sure that they make the academic progress as near to as normal as they would at this time in their educational career, and balancing that with their well-being. And I think our feeling at the moment is that right at this very moment in time, for many of our students, it's actually their well-being that's more important than really pushing them hard on the academics. However, what we're trying to do is have as many systems in place that allow those that really do want to push on to be able to do that. And so in terms of, and we've had a few questions about prep and what do we do with prep and so on. Again, we're trying to be as flexible as possible with that. And I'm seeing on the chat that some parents are saying we need more asynchronous work. Other parents are saying, no, we need the live work because that helps us and able to do our job. So I think there is a real difficulty and a real balance for us. And again, I go back to, we will be looking at all these comments that you're making and endeavour to build what you're saying into our overall responses. I'm just going to go onto the other screen and just see what else. There's a question about Ramadan. Maybe I can refer this to Mr. Wilson. Looking forward to Ramadan. Has there been any discussion about school timings yet?
I think a lot of the discussions on school timing for Ramadan will be in light of what, when we go back and how much time we have. But it is a discussion that we've started with the school groups that we're talking to, and it is something we're looking to raise with ADEC. But it's sort of, if we're back face to face in a week's time, that changes the dynamic to if we're not back. But there is as Tim was mentioning in a moment, there's the opportunity to. I
think Mr. Wilson has frozen there. Mr. Gibson, is Mr. Wilson frozen for you?
I don't think so. No.
All right. Are you back?
You're in full flow just now.
That's the code for saying I'm talking too much and I'm.
It was me frozen.
I think the answer is I think there is a flexibility during Ramadan without upsetting cultural sensitivities to be able to, and this is where the asynchronous comes in, to set extra tasks. There is that opportunity to develop that and give people the chance to catch up, etc., etc. But we've also got to take stock and talk to ADEC about that.
Thank you. A question about curriculum adjustments, and it links back to some of the stuff we were talking about earlier. Would there be a possibility for curriculum adjustments to ensure topics are covered thoroughly by the end of the year, even if it is if less is covered, but in a way that all children benefit within the online environment? Mr. Gibson, can I pass that one to you, please?
Yep. So yes, is the short answer to that. Mr. Wilson's talked about some of the intervention programs that we're putting in place. When we look at curriculum, one of the phrases we talk about a lot is the core curriculum, really looking at the enabling subjects of literacy and numeracy, so maths and English, looking at the importance of science for discovery and curiosity, being able to test and develop good argument evidence. So yes, the curriculum will be covered. It will be covered in full over the course of this year. One of the, I touched on it before, one of the ironies of remote learning is actually we tend to get through the curriculum, and I found this in another school as well as this school, we tend to cover the curriculum more quickly often than we do if we were in a normal school working day with lots of other things taking place as well. Now, as we're adjusting to make that requires us to do it efficiently, and it's those efficiencies that we're talking about. Part of this is to do with looking at the tracking, looking at making sure that where there are concerns, we're putting interventions in place, whether that's phonics at year 1, whether it's looking at maths gaps in year 3, whether it's looking at some literacy elements in years 5 and 6. So yes, the curriculum will be covered in full. And what we're also wanting to do is actually, just as we'd have a curriculum enrichment week, we're looking at making sure that we can use those times as well to extend and to enrich our curriculum too. Because as I talked before about dragging children through a curriculum, we need to build some variety into the curriculum, which is what we'd be doing in normal circumstances, and it's certainly what we're going to be doing in these circumstances. So, if in a couple of weeks' time, there are a few days where things seem to change in terms of rhythm, pace, direction. We're not talking as specifically about English and about maths as discrete subjects, but we're doing some work that's more themed, more topic-based. That's why. It's because we're pursuing those paths where actually we're wanting to just give the children an opportunity to come at it from a different angle. We want to be able to get their thinking and nurdle their thinking out of them from a different point of view as well. So I hope that helps.
Yep, go ahead, Mr. Wilson.
Can I just pick up a chat about public exams? People are very, very worried about grades. Last year we had to predict. We were within about 2% of what we predicted to actual grades. Now, when I look around the world, there were people within whose grades changed 20 to 30%. Now, a couple of things. One is that's because the grades have been robust over the last couple of years. But what it will give us is credibility with exam boards. The next thing to say is this: when we look at our tracking for A-level, it's pretty much hand and glove to the tracking from last year in terms of what our predictions are and what they're actually achieving. And the GCSE, the gap between the prediction at this stage and their actual results is about the same gap as it was last year. So in other words, we're confident that we have a pretty good finger on where they're at the moment. However, what we're trying to do is to do a series of dry runs, one in the mock examinations, where we're looking at both their technique and also what they know, and giving ourselves enough time between now and the second run at it, which will be in early May, so that we can then choose the data that best supports that child. Now, what we're not going to do is underplay the child. What we're not going to do is set a ridiculous set of exam results that bear no relation to that child, because it will affect other generations. But last year proved we were pretty much accurate. Even when the exam boards changed the rhetoric away from the algorithm, our results stayed pretty much the same. The good thing about it is the GCSE results have been the best in Abu Dhabi for the last 2 years, and the results significantly increased on last year. They went up around 10% A stars, A's and B's. Now the EPQ results help us, because it says this is what this cohort does against last year's cohort. And as I say, they've moved from 67% A stars, A's to 86% A stars, A's. So we've got a lot of very good material already. Because the pupils are being taught in online learning is pretty intense, and because they're in small class sizes, it's a lot easier to get that accurate. So rest assured, we're going to use every opportunity to get the right grades. The bit that people are confused about are, why are we not waiting till we're back face to face before we run our exams? The reason for that is, if we have half term and then we do our exams, then we mark our exams, then we've only got 2 weeks till the end of term, then we've got a 2-week holiday, then we have a couple of days, 7 or 8 days, then it's Ramadan, then we have to have the next test. We won't actually improve those results, and we won't be able to show that improvement in our internal data. So important question that person asked, and thank you for answering it. So thank you for asking.
I fully support that. I'm being the only current A-level teacher on the panel at the moment. I fully endorse that. We do know the students extremely well, and I think one of the real difficulties for us in order to answer a question with absolute clarity, we can't, because Ofqual are still going through the consultation process, and we won't exactly know what we have to give or what we have to do until they've told us what we have to do. And so I think what Mr. Wilson's just alluded to is that we are trying to give our students the best opportunity, whatever it is they require us to do, be it online, be it live, be it exam, be it a further set of mocks and so on. There've been a number of questions, and it's very clear to me, looking at this slightly from the outside, that there's still quite a lot of questions being asked about the Year 5 group. And I'm going to ask a couple of questions and ask Mr. Gibson to respond to these. So first question, may I ask why the school didn't think about asking parents' opinion on super bubbles with a survey, considering the many surveys on the various matters that we've participated in? And then a point from Year 5 upwards, really, saying that the full delivery of live lessons was a godsend in the academic year 2020-21. The children really appreciate the structure which mirrors a normal school day. Please do not take them away. I suppose I'd ask you the first one really about you. Well, the first one about the statement about live delivery. Is that going to change, Mr. Gibson?
No, there are no plans for it to change. And again, it's interesting in the chat seeing there's some people feel very, very strongly that an increase, if there was a decrease in live delivery and an increase in asynchronous, then that thrusts the workload back onto our parents and our families. Other people have approached me to say, actually, it'd be great to have some things that are asynchronous that will mean actually we can judge our family lives in a slightly different way and manage our lives in a slightly different way. So actually, Mr. McConnell, but it goes back to what you were saying, there's no such thing as a one size fits all. And that's the same principle with our prep at the moment. It is there and it is optional. So we are setting it. It's optional for pupils to compete. But the reason being, there are absolutely some pupils who need that stretch, that extension, that consolidation. There are other pupils for and family circumstances where actually, a day's work, a day's screen time is enough. So there's no plan to reduce the amount of live learning. What we may need to think about is whether we broaden our range of options and put a few more things on the menu.
Thank you. And what about the question about the super bubbles?
Yeah, so really we're now heading back to how we were planning to set up for when we making decisions about at the end of last term, thinking about how we'd come back this term. And the context of that is we'd had FS1 through to year 6 in school. We'd had years 10, 11, 12, 13 in school. We were told to expect years 7, 8, 9 coming back into school. And in my presentations I did to families in years 5, 6, 7 and 8 last year, I explained, Mr. Wilson referenced it, that back in the first 4 weeks of September, it was all hands on deck. And everybody, no matter what their role in school, if they were not going to be delivering live lessons to pupils learning remotely, they were drafted in to work alongside teachers in the classrooms. We had more classrooms set up because we weren't working in multiples of 20. So we had 8 classes running in year 5, 8 classes running in year 6. With an additional 8 bubble supervisors in each year group as well. The sustainability of that was limited, particularly as we planned we hoped for years 7, 8, 9 to come back in. So in terms of setting out how we were going to manage groups and manage spaces, actually having trialed putting 2 groups together to see how they worked, for example, if a teacher had been ill, then we had some good evidence that worked well in face-to-face scenarios, and we looked at examples in year 3, in year 4, and in year 5, where we trialled that in the library in the autumn term. And as we were planning on coming back to face-to-face learning for the start of this 2021 start of this term, that was the thinking behind it. We needed to find ways to make sure we could use our staff to the best effect for the delivery of learning to our children. So that was the philosophy behind it. Clearly, the vehicle that we'd set up, both in terms of format of delivery, which we've talked about, the timetable set up for face-to-face as well. It was as though what we'd set out, the journey we were setting out on, as it turned out, the sat-nav took us in a completely different direction. And actually, if we had known, if we'd had greater greater warning, if we'd been able to, hindsight is fantastic, but if we'd known back in the middle of December what we were going to be managing and delivering for certainly the first month, possibly longer into 2021, inevitably we would have organised differently. And that is why when we met with parents a week ago, we talked about the changes that we were making at year 5.
Thank you. Just going in a slightly different direction, a question here, are teachers still regularly testing? I'll answer that one fairly straightforward. Yes, we are. The testing regime remains in place. Since September, all teaching staff have had are on a 10 to 12 day cycle with getting tested. What was interesting, and I had a number of questions from parents when the students were being tested before coming back to school, when is the next test going to be? Again, a bit like the instructions we've had before from ADEC, we're never really sure 100% until they tell us, because they are then dependent on what resources are available to them. My expectation is that before the end of next week, before the students due to come back again on the 7th of February, we will have another testing round, and I'm expecting that any students due to come back will also have to have another test for the age 12s and above. And then ongoing from there, the instructions I'm understanding is that will then continue on a 12-day to 2-week cycle, that testing regime will still continue. For those of us who have had vaccines, we still need to have those tests until we're told we don't need to have those tests. My expectation, again, is that probably those will continue until, I would imagine, the effect of the vaccines has become more clearer across the whole Emirates or the whole of the UAE, But as far as I'm aware at the minute, and I am somebody who has had the vaccine, I will still have to continue having a test to prove that I'm negative. Go back to just a little bit more on academics and concerns over children in the prep and senior school who may have fallen behind. Is there any data to say children in the prep and senior may have fallen behind? Again, can I throw that to Mr. Gibson, please, to talk about the prep school?
Yeah, there is data on academic attainment, and that, as I said earlier, that data is being collected and collated in the same way that it would be if children were in school. Where we need to ask ourselves different questions about that data is when it comes to the why, and what we're looking at, because whenever there's a drop, you don't simply looking at a shift in the number on its own. That tells you something, but you need to find out the why to then work out what you're going to do about it. What is a greater indicator, though, of the level of academic attainment and progress is the level of engagement. And it's those levels of engagement that we're monitoring and tracking particularly closely as well. Clearly, in a face-to-face lesson, it's really easy. It's just second nature. It's instinctive for a teacher to manage and monitor the level of engagement. This is something where you may think it's binary. It's the pupils in the lesson or the pupils not in the lesson. The camera's on, the camera's off. Actually, it is more sophisticated than that, because it's about seeing ways in which we can track not just a child being in the lesson, but making sure through the marking, through the assessment, that they've been in the lesson and they've learned from that lesson as well. So that work is still taking place. What do we do for those children who are not making the progress that we'd hoped? A number of different things. So, for example, I know one of the maths teachers has got in touch with parents to say, actually, this week your child didn't get on as well with ABC. That is the first part. That there's a record of where the child needs further progress, and that's, of course, when that topic is revisited, that will be taken forward, that record with the child, as just this part of their progress tracking as well. So it is what we as teachers are doing all the time. The start point for the next lesson that we do on perimeter is the end point from the last lesson on perimeter. We'll continue to do that. Yes, it's slightly harder because we're not able to gauge that face-to-face sense, but in some ways there's such a body of evidence from the submissions online, we can see, there is the evidence there that we can track. We just need to be methodical about making sure we track it carefully.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think that the subjects that are most affected are those practical subjects where we haven't been able to get people into labs or into workshops, and we've very much got a plan that when the students do return, that we will have, in effect, sort of theme days where there will be significant time given over to practical subjects to enable the children to catch up. We're running out of time there. That's actually 45 minutes. It's gone through really quickly. I'm very conscious that there are one or two of you who we haven't been able to answer your questions, or you still feel a bit frustrated that you haven't necessarily had an answer that you want. I would very much ask you to reach out individually to either your tutor, class teacher, or the head of year, or the housemaster, as necessary, and please keep that dialogue flow open. I'm going to stop talking now, and I will hand back to Mr. Wilson to say a final few words. Thank you all very much for participating. Obviously, a really good discussion going on in the discussion comments there as well. Thank you very much indeed, and good night to you all.
Thank you, Tim, and thank you. I mean, I've gone quiet because I'm just obviously reading down the comment section. Those of you that are also reading the comment section will realise how deeply personal the comments are in terms of each individual family have a different concern. I'll reiterate, I mean, one of the comments is from a family we have reached out to, and we need to have that one-to-one to address their specific issues. It's really not helpful for that to come online and just keep pushing the same question. We were asking people to obviously follow a routine, tutor, etc. But thank you. There's been some very useful feedback. This isn't a perfect science. This is something that everybody is having to invent as we go along. And I think the most important thing that we can say in all of this is we just need to learn a different dance when there's a need to change the music. So keep feeding back to us. We'll keep doing what we can do. But let's keep this, let's keep this honest and not personal. Okay, thank you.